foods. It's apparent that the vitamins in them are in much different forms than what we consume now. And not only that, because of the quality of the animal foods and the way they were raised, the vitamin content is significantly higher.
Okay.
That's like a loose premise of it. Um,
So what's the prescription from that?
my prescription, like what is
Like, are
the
you saying that we
what
should,
are the benefits of following a diet like this, or what is the difference between indigenous groups and tribes and what
or
we
I
have
guess like
now?
what are you like advocating that we like do like a certain diet, or do you think that some diet would be more optimal than what we eat now, or what's the yeah? I guess what
Yeah, so if we look at these people, they were free of any degenerative disease. So if we talk about obesity, heart disease, any cardiovascular related diseases, pretty much anything. I mean, sort of
wait. You're telling me that all indigenous people were free of things like heart disease?
before modern foods, yes. And even in cases of, it's interesting. If you look at, like, I have a couple of studies on the Maasai, and is that atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque in the arteries, is there's a big difference between actual arteries and the inflammation caused by cardiac events. So when we look at these Maasai, these people that subsisted off of blood, meat, and milk, they were actually immune in a way to the disease.
Wait,
Let me
I'm really
link that to
curious.
you.
Can you link me for to see that people didn't get things like heart disease before I guess before like modern day nutrition was
I
invented,
mean,
or
that's not something you're gonna. That's not. I mean, that's not gonna be something you're gonna be able to read in a short period. I can link you a big text. See if I could find the specific. And let me just go grab the. Sorry, I didn't prepare this beforehand. Let me just grab the studies on the Maasai that I had. That book that I linked, I mean, that's not going to be something you're going to be able to look at quickly. There's just, it's hundreds of pages. This is one study on the Maasai. Goes summary. Investigation of 400 Maasai men and number of women and children showed little or no clinical or chemical signs of atherosclerosis. Despite a long continuous diet of only meat and milk, men have low serum cholesterol levels and no signs of arteriosclerotic heart disease. The common understanding that animal fats cause coronary disease has been investigated. We're talking specifically about degenerative disease. We're not talking about like literally almost all of the Native Americans got wiped out from smallpox.
mm-hmm.
Specifically referring to is anything that's kind of related to, like, such as cancer, disease, obesity, diabetes, all of these things were absent when they were on there.
Do you think that like don't you think you could achieve like similar outcomes using things like ketogenic diets though, instead of just going like full meat only diet? Or
Oh, well, the reason I reached out to you wasn't really specifically to talk about a meat only diet.
mm-hmm.
It was to talk about the base nutrient density that these animal foods offered. So if we actually look at, and let me get the source for this real quick. If we actually look at hunter-gatherer macronutrient ratios in their diets, approximately like 65 to 75, 65 to 70% of the calories foods. So every indigenous group consumed quite a variety of plant foods in most cases. In the case of like the indigenous Aborigines, they would literally have access to hundreds to thousands of wild plant foods just in their native habitat. So a few indigenous groups that subsisted entirely off of meat, and the big thing to keep in mind is that every food in every case was eaten out of necessity. These people had to survive. So that we might see certain groups of Native Americans that subsisted mostly off of buffalo, and they might have gotten 80 to 90% of their calories from buffalo. But then we might look at a group of Swiss people that are living And these Swiss people might have had, 60% of their calories from just cheese, and then the rest of their calories from rye bread.
Mm-hmm.
Variance in all of these indigenous diets, but the one common factor is the presence of high quality animal foods. That's the kind of thing to take away from this. And if we do look at a ketogenic diet doesn't really focus on the nutrient content of the foods. It's kind of difficult to correlate. I mean, in a way, would following a ketogenic diet achieve macronutrient ratios that some of these hunter gatherers are following? Possibly.
Well, I guess like
But
the reason why I ask is I'm looking at things that are related to, especially when you talk about things like obesity and diabetes. It seems like controlling your intake of sugar is really what's going on here. That just eating meat isn't conferring you some protection, some mystical protection against like diabetes or obesity, but more if you're only eating meats or even meats and vegetables, the amount of sugar that you're intaking is dramatically decreasing. And I feel like that would be like a huge explanatory thing there as well. No.
I mean, if we're just talking about the preventing degenerative disease, and we look at a ketogenic diet, and yeah, I mean, there's plenty of evidence of that reversing diabetes in a lot of people. That's certain, and the high carbohydrate intake, the refined carbohydrate intake, the sugar intake, contribute to.
Wait, hold on. Your mic keeps cutting out. I don't know if you're using push to talk, but like every now and then I'll lose like 2 words out of a sentence.
Is this better? I'll just talk a little louder.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'll tell you if it cuts out
I'm
again.
sorry. I'm using a dynamic microphone, so
Yeah, that's fine.
just make sure to keep my voice at the same level.
Yeah, I got it.
But I just linked one study that showed just the macronutrient ratios, and the other study that showed hunter-gatherer diets, meat-based yet to heart disease. Ketogenic diet in regards to diabetes, a lot of diseases, that's one element of diet. That's removing inflammation.
Yeah, so here's kind of the problems that I have. So like when you write here, like the paradoxical nature of hunter-gatherer diets, meat-based yet non-anthropogenic, where does anthropogenic mean damaging to the heart? What does this word mean? Yeah, tending to promote the formation of fatty plaques in the arteries. Okay. What I'm wondering is that like if you look at hunter-gatherer lifestyles, these are people that were probably far more physically active than what we are today. I feel like there are so many more variables here than just diet that might be impacting. Like, sure, maybe the diet is helping too, but wouldn't the immense amount of physical activity help as well?
But the main correlation that I wanted to make with the nutrient density of this diet was mainly, if we look at the facial structure, if we look at the height, if we look at their lack of need for glasses or braces, glaring thing that stuck out to me. And I mean, you could even Google like Native American eyesight or sight, and these people, these Native Americans that are only several generations off their indigenous diet, and these Aborigines that are only 1 or 2 generations off their indigenous diet. Such incredible eyesight. I mean, they used to recruit the Aborigines for the Navy, and because they would literally be able to see ships that were miles away.
Wait, so you think that having a meat-only diet is helping these people with their eyesight or their current eyesight?
No, I think the incredibly high retinoic acid content of the animal foods in these diet is necessary for optimal human physical development.
Has this been demonstrated with a study or anything, or?
Only demonstration and the only data that I have that it's not really, there's nothing showing that, for humans, there is a study called the Pottinger cat study. Cats did go sterile after being fed several generations of a cooked meat diet as opposed to a raw meat diet. And it did show the effects of change in nutrient profile.
Wait, for cats?
Cats, though.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Your mic keeps cutting out. When I ask you to repeat, it's just because your mic keeps cutting out. So wait, I didn't hear that again. Did you say this was for cats?
There's one study called the Pottinger cat study where they fed cats a cooked meat diet, and
Yeah, so
within
my only problem here, and I'm not trying to be too picky, because animal testing is very fucking important for this type of stuff. I totally recognize that. But when we're talking about things like health and diet, cats are obligate carnivores. I feel like their digestive tract is going to be much different than ours, with the way that they digest and integrate different vitamins and shit into their body. Like humans can theoretically live, well, not theoretically, we can live without eating meat at all. Cats, if they don't eat meat, will die. Are these digestive tracts really comparable?
I mean, if we do want to look at the digestive tract of a human and compare it to any animal in particular, it is closest to that of a wolf. So, in regards to the acidity of the stomach, the length of the small intestine, the lack of fermentation chambers in the gut, the lack of bacteria that ferments fatty acids. If you look at the human digestive tract, it is meant to synthesize nutrients from animal foods. The only correlation I have between facial development and structure and all of those things is specifically really looking at these indigenous groups of people and their facial development, their height, their absence of degenerative disease, and then correlating that with all the animal foods in their diet.
Okay, yeah. Hold on. Okay, so because we keep like lumping in like a ton of things together, and then kind of like moving past it, but I'm kind of interested in each of these individual things. So like when you talk about things like eyesight, or you talk about things like height, I've never heard this. So my understanding of how height works in a human is that height is something that is largely genetically determined, that you have a capacity to reach a certain height, and that things like you've got growth plates that are more or less genetically predetermined, and as long as you receive the proper amount of nutrients, you'll grow to a certain height, whatever you're going to, and then your growth plates close, and then that's it. Are you making the claim that like if you eat like a certain diet that people will necessarily be taller? That's like a thing that is true? Or?
I guess I would to answer that, I would ask a question. I would say, okay, well, why do you think Italians are short, and why do you think Dutch people are tall? Is it genetics, or does something determine genetics over generations?
I mean, that could be an incredibly complicated question. I mean, there could be a large number of genetic factors that play into it. There could have been environmental pressures at one point in time that influenced this genetic factor. I'm not sure. Are you saying that it was solely diet, or?
And if we look at the amount of animal foods and grains in the diet of Italians over the past thousands of years, grains is substantially higher than the Dutch. If you look at the diet of the Dutch people in the Netherlands, well, pretty much the tallest country in the world, they have a very high intake of animal foods in the diet.
Yeah, sure, but like without the problem, without having like studies, or the problem without having like a causal, well, one, like some sort of study that highly correlates it, and then two, like a biological mechanism that describes why this would take place, is that I could propose hypotheses for why this may or may not be true. So for instance, let's say that in a vacuum, a short person will outlive a long person, because a short person needs to consume less calories to survive. So the long person is at a disadvantage there in an environment for being able to survive and reproduce. Now, let's say that long person, or let's say that a taller person is able to exist only because being tall allows them to hunt down certain forms of animals, right? And if they were shorter, they either wouldn't have the leg, right, the ability to run long distances or hunt animals, right? So like I could take two populations that grow entirely apart from one another, where one people tend to eat plants and another people tend to eat animals, and the people that eat animals might be taller slightly because that's the trait that's selected for when it comes to hunting, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthier or better off for it. They just happen to be taller because they're more suited for that, right? But that also doesn't necessarily mean that eating that food enabled them to grow taller. That just might have been the trait that was selected for, right? I'm not saying that I'm correct. I'm just saying that could be a possible explanation. Wouldn't you need like a causal mechanism to explain one over the other?
You could say that, but it's like a plant. If a plant doesn't have the right nutrients in the soil to grow, it's not going to achieve its growth potential. Say that almost everyone nowadays does not achieve adequate
amounts. So like that should be able, if that's true, that should be demonstrated, that people should be able to grow taller. That should be pretty easy to demonstrate, no? Like malnutrition and not growing to your theoretical height as a result of malnutrition should be something that's pretty easy to demonstrate.
There's a big difference between malnutrition and optimal nutrition. I mean, what people think is average and what people think is optimal, for sure.
I mean, I guess I feel like I feel like this is even like a really socially loaded question too, because the idea that being really tall is optimal, that's not even necessarily true. Like again, like larger calorie consuming things tend to live less longer and need to gather more energy in order to survive. I would consider these suboptimal traits for survival, and from the
perspective of hunters, being taller was a desirable trait. I mean, you could cover more ground, taller, and they have more bone density and muscle mass. They're stronger. They're able
Yeah,
to hunt
yeah,
better.
I agree with what you're saying here, but this is kind of showing my point. Like again, like having greater muscle density, this is a negative when it comes to survival. This is why humans don't naturally come with a ton of muscle, right? Because we don't want to carry extra muscle if we don't need to. So having to carry more muscle in order to be able to hunt animals, it seems to be the other way around then, that the reason why these people are taller or maybe stronger is because they needed to be in order to capture food. Whereas if you're farming or living a more plant-based life, you don't need that much energy, no?
No, but it correlates directly with the percentage of animal foods present in the diet. Because if there are animal foods present in the diet, the body is able to grow to its optimal height because of the protein, the fat soluble vitamins. But if not a high percentage of plant food, if it's not a high percentage of animal foods, then there's going to be some sort of bottleneck on their height.
Yeah,
And
but
this might not.
and I agree with what you're saying there, but or I'm sorry, if I were to agree with what you're saying there, that
Little
I feel like you
Steve.
should be able to demonstrate that. There should be like some study or something showing
I
that.
did. I was just looking for a study. I did
Okay,
just
yeah.
link one. It's child height gain is associated with consumption of animal source foods and livestock owning households in Western Kenya.
Okay, but in Western Kenya, are we talking malnutrition here? Like, we can actually kind of like read this really quickly, I guess. I'm just reading through it real quick.
You're gonna look to. I haven't gone through this one before. Let me see if I can find another one on dairy association.
So this is among children of over 6 months old. Reported frequency of egg and milk consumption was associated with increased monthly height gain. Poultry ownership was associated with higher reported frequency of egg, milk, and chicken consumption. Some livestock diseases were associated with lower. Blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I'm curious if this is We conducted a longitudinal cohort study of anthropometry and 3D feeding recalls among children. In addition, we collected data on wealth, livestock ownership, and livestock disease, and some else we use linear. Oh, okay, hold on. This one you linked is interesting. Okay, little is known about how cow's milk consumption affects growth of young children. The consumption of milk, but not other dairy products, is associated with height among U.S. preschool students. Sample of 1,002 children aged 24 to 59 months used. Multivariate regression tested for associations between milk consumption and height, controlling variation. Results. Children in the highest quartile of milk intake were taller than those in Q2 and Q3, but not Q1. Milk intake. Total calcium had a positive effect on height, but did not change the height differences among percentiles. Total protein was not associated with height, and Q4 children were taller than those in other quartiles. Children who drank milk daily were taller than those with less frequent intake. Consumption of other dairy products had no association with height. Blacks were taller than whites, and Mexican Americans controlling for milk intake did not alter this pattern. Okay, so this seems to... I think this is evidence that drinking milk at the very least could cause you to grow a little bit taller. Sure.
Here's another study that's on the birth correlating with height, IQ, I believe, educational attainment, and the reason we're looking at the month that the child is born is because in nature, what would have happened is spring and the summer brings grass and food, and the ruminant animals become fat. And this is when humans kind of have their prime hunting period in the late summer and fall. So the idea is that humans would have procured nutrition from these animals in the summer and fall. They would have gotten pregnant and then given birth in the spring and the summer months. And the reason it's important that they give birth in the spring and the summer months is because levels in the body, you can only store enough vitamin D3 for one winter. And the scale of storing vitamin D3 if you're below 40 nanograms per milliliter, your body's pretty much running on empty. It's using whatever vitamin D3 it can get.
Mm-hmm.
Once the amount of vitamin D3 is past 40 nanograms per milliliter, your body starts storing it for the winter. And once you're above 60, it's deemed kind of that your body has adequate D3 stores for the winter. Over 70, 75 is ideal. The numbers I got this from were from it was a study on indigenous peoples living in, I believe, some like an Arctic Russian climate. And the reason I use them as a demonstration is because it's pretty much the minimal amount of vitamin D3 as they are not in a sunny area.
Mm-hmm.
Find this, but the important thing is that, and I'm going to link some to video I did, and it just has a bunch of studies in the description of the video, is the vitamin levels in mother's breast milk vary drastically. Levels in breast milk can vary from 0.05% to 0.73%. So that's almost a 20-fold variance in levels. And not only does this apply to breast milk, this applies to all the vitamins, all the fat soluble vitamins, all the B vitamins, all the K vitamins. It's hard to really, problem with like this whole idea that I have is that there's a lot of bits and pieces of information that you can't really, show a concrete as opposed to, things that you're kind of piecing together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's scary because like if you're not careful, like anybody can weave together any story. And it seems like when it comes to biology, like everything is like biology is very, very soft in terms of its scientific claims when it comes to diet and whatnot, because it's so hard to understand how everything is linked together. So I just get kind of worried when somebody has, I don't know how far you take it. I haven't watched all of your channel, but I know like people like Peterson's daughter, Jordan Peterson's daughter, will say things like an all meat diet can help you cure like every disease you have.
Listen. She is a complete, and I mean to say this in the nicest way. She's a bit of a ditzy moron in regards to this diet. And the difference between, she eats ribeye steak all day. I'm eating pretty much every part of the animal, a very high wild.
So we watched a video of you eating like cat brains and liver and whatnot. So
that's a little.
Brains, yeah.
But just to,
Mm-hmm.
if we want to actually look at I think anyone would agree that if you don't have a proper mineral and what are the key vitamins that plants need to grow? I think it's potassium, nitrogen, and I can't remember, but nitrogen, potassium. Plants need 3. Let me just look it up real quick. So plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to grow as a minimum in the soil. And they call these fertilizers NPK fertilizers. These are like carbs, fats, and proteins.
Mm-hmm.
And you're pretty much giving the plant macronutrients to grow. You're not giving the plant micronutrients. You're not giving it all the minerals. You're not giving it all the other vitamins, vitamin K, carotenoids. You're not giving the plant the other vitamins that will increase the vitamin concentration in the food. So if we look at, I'm sure you've heard like they add pigmentation to farmed salmon because the farmed salmon don't get the orange color because they don't have the carotenoids present in their diet.
Sure.
If an animal or a plant does not have the required nutrients in the soil, in the diet, if they're not eating the proper foods, their tissue isn't going to be reflective of the vitamins themselves. It applies to humans too. So if we look at for plants, it's simple because what happens if a plant doesn't get enough nutrients? It just doesn't grow. It dies. It doesn't grow optimally. Nutrients that humans need. And to me, if I ask someone what a healthy diet meant, I mean, I'm hoping part of their answer would be the vitamin and mineral content of the diet, at least to some degree. Because if the vitamin and mineral content of the diet isn't the most important thing in the diet, then what is? If your vitamin D3 intake, if your omega-3 fatty acid intake, if those things aren't the most important part of the diet, then I'd have to ask what is.
Mm-hmm.
So then if we actually look at those vitamins individually, the vitamin versions of the plant and the animal form, vitamin A, for example, vitamin A in plant foods occurs as carotenoids, and limited conversion rates in the body. not only are the conversion rates limited, and they only convert at usually fruits are around 14-to-1
Yeah.
conversion
Wait,
rate.
wait.
And
So what are we moving towards? You're essentially saying that you think we can get most of these from meaty things, or?
what I'm saying is the forms of vitamins in plants are not, we can't assimilate enough nutrition from them to be in optimal health. I'm getting at. So if you take, you can eat all the carrots you want, but your body can only convert a certain amount of carotenoids to retinoic acid. And even in that case, some people have genetic polymorphisms where they can't convert carotenoids to retinoic acid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty large percentage of the population, actually.
Wait, is that true?
Vitamin K2. Good link on that. Give me a second.
Sure.
I think this was in a lot of this, like that video I linked to, carnivore versus vegan nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of going over a lot of what was in that video. Okay, so this is the study on carotenoid conversion to vitamin A. And the important thing, the main thing to note here is part of the study.
Wait, are you still here?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what happened was they fed subjects 6 milligrams of carotene in oil, and the conversion factor was 3.8-to-1, which is pretty good. 4-to-1. The dosage to 126 milligrams of carotene in oil, the conversion factor went up to 55-to-1. And this does
Wait, when
talk about
when they did what? It went up to 55-to-1?
they increased the dosage by about 25 times of carotene in oil.
Okay.
So when they tried to administer higher doses of the vitamin, the conversion rate lowered drastically.
Oh,
almost
sure.
tenfold.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with it. So bioavailability, we're talking about the ability to, like, if you consume like 10,000 fucking grams of protein, you're not going to get all of that. Most of that is going to be
Yeah, of course. But this is different in a sense that use higher amounts of vitamin A for processes and store it, but it just, the plant version, you can't achieve optimal levels for it. And if you scroll down in the study right before conclusions, it says, we have observed large variations in the bioconversion of dietary carotene to vitamin A, which may be related to the genetic characteristics of the subjects. Because the enzyme responsible for beta-carotene conversion into retinol is B-carotene 15,15, MOX, some scientific stuff. Genetic polymorphisms in the gene may contribute to the poor converter phenotype. Reported that 2 common non-synonymous single nucleotide polymorphisms had been identified, and in vitro biochemical characterization of blah, blah, blah. Responsiveness. It basically shows their ability it decreases 69% to convert carotene into retinol acid. And that's why some people turn orange, and that's also why some people do far worse on a vegan diet than others.
Mm-hmm.
Large percentage of the population. I don't remember where I found the statistics on that, but I think it was up to 40% of the population had a highly impaired. And the reason this vitamin is so important, specifically vitamin A, retinoic acid, is because in the creation of every cell. So, cell differentiation, what cells your body chooses to make, is regulated by gene expression, which needs acid is a precursor to that entire process. Arguably say that every cell in the body, and whether or not your body has the optimal fuel to make it, by vitamin A, and the only way to really get a considerable amount of vitamin A is in the form of retinoic acid, which only occurs in animal products.
Gotcha. That's interesting. This is why the fish oil
Um,
capsules are so recommended.
well, fish oil is omega-3, but cod liver oil, liver is the only animal food that's abundant in vitamin A.
Uh-huh.
And did you ever hear of like the orcas were killing sharks and eating their liver?
No, but what about it?
Orcas are killing great white sharks and eating their livers. This is one example in nature of preference for organs, and the liver of the shark has a very high vitamin A concentration. So specifically killing sharks and consuming their liver for the nutrition that was in the liver.
Mm-hmm.
Look at animals in nature that kill, they usually go for the guts first, where the organs are, where the nutrition is. Even I even have like a compilation of clips of certain herbivorous animals, unquote, eating meat if available, like deer eating birds, uh, monkeys eating meat. Uh, there's a lot of preference for. There's a book called, and I can link it to you. Busy, or I'm assuming I don't even have time to read stuff myself, let alone
Yeah, that's fine.
or. But there's this book called The Fat of the Land, and it's by Vjarmer Stephenson, who's an Arctic explorer. And this was back in the 1900s, and they threw him in a hospital after, because what had happened was he came back from these Arctic expeditions. He claimed that he survived for only, I think it was a couple of years on an all meat diet, and they were like, "Oh no, you would have died. You would have gotten scurvy." So they put this guy into a hospital for like a year, and they made him only eat meat. But the main part of this book, referencing it now, is because these indigenous people had very specific preferences for parts of the animal and what they would do with them.
Mm-hmm.
They
Sorry, real
might have
quick. So someone in chat
Yeah.
said, "Did that retard say that vitamin A is only in animal products? It's bullshit. Call him out on that, please. Don't listen to him at all." So what you're saying is essentially is that vitamin A exists in. I think you acknowledge that it exists in vegetables, but what you're saying is that the bioavailability of those
carotenoid form.
foods is not
So
great.
of the USDA
Mm-hmm.
to label vitamin A is a bit bullshit. So if a food has beta carotene in it, they can label it as vitamin A on the label of the food, but that's not actually correct, because food has vitamin A in the carotenoid form, not the retinoic acid form.
And the carotenoid form needs that that one
It
thing in
needs
order to convert it or whatever, right?
it needs fat to be converted,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have the genetic predisposition to be good at converting it. And the main contradictory thing is, okay, if you need fat to convert beta carotene into retinoic acid, you're going to get fat in all parts of the world, at all climates, at all points in time. The only access to fat would be from animal foods. And I mean, to get fat from a plant food in most parts of the world is, it's not accessible.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Tropical and warm climates.
Well, what else did you want to talk about, or what else? What else do you got for us?
This is the main premise of the idea that if we consumed, just the overall nutrient density of these animal foods, if we consume them, we would be in optimal health. But it's, if you look in nature, do wolves have crooked teeth? Or wolves wearing glasses? And sound kind of crazy, but
Well, so like,
I don't believe.
So I'm okay with the dietary claims. I did a little bit of research before I had this conversation, and it seems like most of what you're saying appears to be lining up with what I've heard, and I haven't heard you say anything too contradictory. But when you start, my worry is when you move from like making pretty basic dietary claims, like for instance bioavailability of vitamins in certain foods, to saying things like wolves have good eyesight, so our eyesight problems are caused by not eating certain foods. I don't know if that's
That's not really what I was getting at. What I was
Uh-huh.
what I was saying was, animals in nature on their diets that they normally eat don't have these problems that we're having.
I don't even know if that's true though. Like,
have-
one, I don't know how, I don't know if the measure for human eyesight is accurate. For instance, is 20/20 vision, is that truly average vision, or does that need to be changed? And then two, I don't know if I don't know if like if humans need optimal eyesight in the same way that wolves do, if that's even like a thing that's necessarily like, um, like if that's a trait that's as highly selected for as it is in wolves. So for instance, like looking at like certain humans and going, well, look, some humans are very hairy and they're very healthy because that like bears are, they can survive in cold climates like bears could. And it's like, okay, well, you know, I'm sure that bears select for thick fur, or, you know, I think that selection is probably a lot more important than humans having thick hair. I just don't know if eyesight, like saying that if we just eat like the right diet, our eyesight would all be perfect.
The correlation wasn't going to be towards wolves. It
Mhm.
was just, I was just kind of mentioning that. I mean, you know, we have people in our modern society. I'm sure everyone knows people who wear glasses and
Mhm.
people who have perfect 20/20 vision. I'm sure people know that, you know, people that have needed braces 2 or 3 times, born with perfectly straight teeth. This is not, yeah, and people, and a lot of the things that people like to correlate to genetics. My belief is that it's of vitamins throughout developmental periods, especially during pregnancy, prenatal periods, nursing. I linked that video earlier that had the studies showing that there's a big variance in various vitamins and DHA levels in mother's breast milk. And uh, I mean, I can't really
Mhm.
convince people without, obviously, because there's no, like, I could say, okay, when they analyzed skulls of Eskimos and Inuit people, the skulls had perfect proportions, they had perfect teeth, they had no signs of dental cavities, they had none of those things. And then I could say, okay, now we have these problems. And then we say, all right, what's the difference in lifestyle? It's the diet, it's the sun exposure, it's all of these things. All of this data that I've been giving you is kind of, I mean, I don't know where you want me to specifically like try to point you to more studies, and they died at birth. For the person that says in the chat because they died at birth,
In the name of
the
the
reason
Galactic Senate of the Republic, you are...
it was so high in certain indigenous groups, and that once they passed a certain age, much longer, was because of the lack of these vitamins during the developmental periods, as necessary past a certain age. Once your body was developed,
Please make this guy stop.
Oh, that's a true point as well, that animals that would have health problems in nature would just die, so we wouldn't see them as often as well, maybe. But yeah, I guess I'm just not sure how much of our problems are caused today by it seems like sugar related stuff. I mean, I don't think I necessarily disagree with most of your broader points though.
I mean, over this conversation, the things I brought up were, okay, indigenous groups consumed these animal foods in their diet and have certain forms of these vitamins in forms that are more available to the human body. That's my first point, and I don't think there's anything refuting that.
Yeah, probably. Again, I just get very cautious, like correlating like conditions of older people to current people when the lifestyle changes are so dramatically different as well.
Oh, it's very difficult to prove because, I mean, one, we don't really have a lot of data on these groups of people. And, even if I can establish that, okay, these people consume these vitamins in these animal forms, it's very apparent that they didn't have some problems that we have now. Putting two and two together and actually saying, okay, well, I mean, we could look at babies fed, babies that are breastfed versus babies that are formula fed. Let me see if I could find something on that real quick.
Breastfed versus what?
Formula fed.
What's your claim?
I'm assuming it's going to be correlated with looking for correlation with higher IQ and birth weight.
Oh yeah, I don't need to. You don't need to show me that. The correlation between IQ and like breastfed, I'm aware of those. That's like very, very, very fucking high. Yeah.
I mean, to me, if we can understand that, have these vitamins in more available forms, require vitamins to grow optimally, The difficult thing to prove is that if you were to give someone more of these vitamins, if it would actually correlate to
Yeah, that would be,
being
that's kind of
taller.
like,
That's the difficult correlation.
that's kind
to
of
make.
the interesting thing that I'm aware of, is like taking a study group of maybe like I don't know, maybe like 100 people, and having like 20 of them go to a keto diet, 20 of them go to a meat only diet, 20 of them do whatever, and then to do like it sucks, but you have to do like a longitudinal, or like over like a course of a year, to monitor health benefits and see what changes. Like not making any of the lifestyle choice changes is what I'd be really curious to see. That's obviously like a huge burden, because I don't know how much interest there even is in investigating. Even on popular diets, it's hard to find data sometimes, like ketogenic diets and stuff. So for more obscure diets, it would be even more difficult. Yeah. But
let me just look at this study. Breastfed infants vitamin K. I mean, I could really beat this to death and show that nutrient deficiencies in modern diets, especially I just really don't know where to go with this, because is modern diets are lacking these vitamins.
Yeah, I just don't know if they're lacking these vitamins because we have because we're not exclusively eating meat, or just because modern diets are super shit,
If you look at the nutrient profile of a ruminant animal, the muscle meat and the fat, the muscle meat in particular doesn't really contain a lot of nutrition. I mean, in the case of wild caught fish, if you try to compare like ribeye steak, it's a world of a difference in omega-3 fatty acid content. And, just eating meat in general, vastly different nutritional profile than foods like liver, brain tissue, bone marrow, kidneys. You can obtain complete nutrition profiles from consuming certain animal foods. Just only eating meat is drastically different.
Sure. All right. Well, hey, anything else for us?
I mean, I kind of touched on all the points I wanted to. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's too convincing.
Well, no, it's not. I mean, it's not like I mean, there are some things that I know to be true. I mean, honestly, you haven't said anything that I don't necessarily disagree with. Like when I look at it, the thing is that just like I'm thinking prescriptively is usually how I think of these things. Like, what can we tell people to do? So on the surface, like all meat diets are never going to happen because it's totally unsustainable. That's impossible. So what I'm interested in is like how much of what you're saying is related to like an all meat diet versus other factors. And what I feel like, and when I say feel, this is my intuitive feeling based on kind of like studies I've read and whatnot, and maybe you'll even agree with this. I feel like of all the benefits you're talking about, I feel like we could get like 90% of these benefits by cutting out most sugars and increasing the amount of physical exercise we get, and that a lot of other things would kind of fall into play from there. That maybe there are some benefits, maybe some things to be researched or discovered past that, but like going to the point of doing like an all meat diet seems like a really extreme move that, one, is totally unsustainable, two, most people would never even do, and then three, I don't think is necessary to get like the majority of the benefits you would from radically changing your diet and the amount of exercise you get every day. That's just kind of like my gut feeling on that.
You think that a lot of the modern problems are more related to negative things in the diet as opposed to a lack of nutrition in the diet?
I feel like I think that the two most neglected things we have today are diet and exercise, and in the kind of the Western world. In that. But so like I think that the exercise probably plays a big role in it. Fucking exercise impacts so much fucking shit in our lives, from hormone production to quality of sleep we get to likelihood of depression. Like there's so much shit that ties into the amount of exercise we get, and I'm sure that like exercising at an early age is going to have a huge impact on a lot of developmental stuff as well. So I mean, like, I mean, the exercise part is probably really fucking important too. That's why I kind of keep pointing back when we talk about like, when we try to compare ourselves to older people, I'm sure that the amount of daily activity they got had a massive impact on the way that they grew up as well. Not just the food they ate. But then also in terms of food, like we do so much shit. It's kind of like saying like, I think that, or well, I'm not trying to start in your position, but like we eat so fucking horribly today. I don't think that we need to do dramatic changes to our diet to have a much better diet, but things that like cutting out like most sugars, like everything we eat is so fucking sugary and so low in nutrients today that I don't know if we necessarily need to go to like an all meat diet to get most of these, to get most of the benefits that you're kind of talking about. That's kind of like my gut feeling on that.
I'm not necessarily advocating an only meat diet. I'm advocating for a base amount of nutrient density in the diet.
Yeah.
For
Which is,
But
I think, like even the FDA like advocates for that. But how many people like actually like follow even those guidelines that I think some people would say are inadequate? Like, I don't even know if those guidelines are traditionally followed by most Americans. Like our sugar
but
intake is way
if you look
higher.
at the RDAs
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the magnesium RDA, it's 400 milligrams. Is it 400 milligrams? Yeah, 400 milligrams RDA of magnesium. But most people don't know that magnesium in plant foods is bound to an oxalic acid molecule, and the bioavailability of oxalic acid molecule is maybe like 20-30%. And then if you look at magnesium taurate, which is magnesium bound to a taurine molecule, in animal foods, the bioavailability is much greater. So if you attain the RDA from both animal and plant foods separately, actually be several times higher in the vitamin. The RDAs are a whole completely different topic to talk about. I mean, the RDA for vitamin D is what, 400 IU. If you're naked on the beach for an hour, you get hundreds of thousands of IU of vitamin D3 through your skin. The RDAs are incredibly correct in a lot of different ways, but like I showed you, correlation of birth month with height. I showed you, the association of consuming animal products and milk with height. The bioavailability of the nutrients in animal foods. I feel like I'm making a reasonably compelling argument. And, even if I showed pictures of these Native Americans and these indigenous people, if we notice their facial structure, if we notice their height, and there's definitely a different level of physical development. But to me, you and the chat don't really seem convinced in any way that there's a correlation directly between the amount of nutrition in the diet in regards to vitamins development.
So it's not so much that, it's just that I've spent enough time like looking into some of these fields to know that the arguments are so insanely fucking complicated that I just get really nervous describing like a causal link without having like 100% like concrete, like from correlation to longitudinal studies to biomechanical explanations for how things happen to actual like, double blind testing, like until you like really start to build up, like it's possible to tell. And there are a lot of fields that kind of suffer from these kinds of like quick jumps to say, oh, well, look, we see this, so this must be the case. And then that ends up not necessarily being the case. So I guess that's just kind of, I spent like, I guess the only field that I've really touched on with any level of like actual digging into it would be the things related to like IQ and to IQ and like genetics and environment, where that topic is so fucking messy, so insanely fucking messy, where even things like separated twins at birth studies aren't necessarily going to be good studies to study genetic differences, like where everything is so fucking messy. And I guess just coming out of all of that research, I get very hesitant to very quickly say, well, look, there's a difference between that group and that group, even though there's a million different variables. This is definitely the cause. I guess I'm just very cautious in making that jump, and that's why I usually just defer to I guess like larger academic bodies of work to see kind of what the prevailing opinion is. And I just haven't heard much come out in terms of saying that like, oh, well, like an all meat diet is the best thing for you. Now, that being said, I mean, there are like I said, most of the things you're saying, I don't necessarily disagree with. I think bioavailability in animal foods is a pretty well documented thing, right? The consumption of meats, especially cooked meats, freed up a lot of time for humans in the past in order to do other tasks and whatnot. I don't think these are bad things. I don't think these are even disagreeable things. I guess I don't like to jump and make the strength of the claim that like eating better foods will improve our eyesight and make us grow taller. These things, I mean, there's evidence pointing towards that. I agree, but man, these are really, really, really strong claims.
It's a pretty big jump, but I mean, saying Italians ate a higher proportion of grain comparison to animal foods when compared to the Dutch and the Netherlands. I mean, what else could you really correlate the height difference to besides
well,
their
again,
diet
like you got to be really
generations?
careful, because like when it says that, it almost sounds like you're engaging in kind of like a post hoc rationalization. Like there could be a lot of things that might influence that. I don't know, but I could spin you up like 5 tales right now that might influence that. That maybe taller people did better in colder climates because they were able to reach certain things, even something as dumb as that, or that shorter people did better in certain climates because of some reason, or that there was less, food available on the ground, so they had to be taller in order to hunt, or that certain types of people migrated. Like, there's like a million different potential hypotheses, and any person pushing any particular narrative could very easily come in and go, oh, well, this is the reason why this is this, and that's the reason why this is this. When the reality is, I'm sure there's like a massive combination of factors that determine why certain people are slightly different than other certain types of people. That's the only thing I kind of am worried about.
I'm just trying to think of like what information I could have brought to this to make this more clear. Because if you read, if you read Weston Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, a main focus of the book is people would be on their normal diets. And then when they would go into the cities, when they would start eating modern foods, their teeth would just rot away.
Yeah, but again, I mean, like, that has to do with like introduction of sugar and whatnot into the diet, right? Like, I don't think that's necessarily just eating.
Oh, but then when they went back to their indigenous diets, tooth loss stopped. So yeah,
I mean, so like somebody could have like a cavity, and then they could go back to eating an indigenous diet, and then their cavity would just stop growing and go away, like the tooth would repair itself, or.
Yeah, there was a degree of repair in the tooth. I mean, let me try to find the actual quote in this book real quick. Dentine would regenerate. I mean, the tooth, obviously, like,
I know that your enamel can repair itself, or if you use toothpaste and shit, that's the point of fluoride and whatnot. But I don't think that like actual cavities in the tooth could reverse themselves. I mean, maybe the decay could stop. I don't even know if that's true though. If a cavity's already formed, I don't know if the decay will just stop or if it'll continue until the cavity's either filled or.
I mean, this book really focuses on, the facial structure and the development. Shows like after 1 or 2 generations on a modern food diet, it shows that, again, I guess I don't know how big of a deal this seems to you, but or on the indigenous diet, they had proper jaw development. They didn't have crooked teeth. They didn't need braces. And then the first and second generations after them, after the parents adapted a modern food diet, didn't have a jaw wide enough to accommodate the teeth, so their teeth were all crooked. They needed braces. I mean, I don't know how important. I mean, in this book, they also mention that pigs were born without eyes if they had a lack of vitamin A in the diet.
Hold on, I'm reading for a second about this teeth thing.
I mean, this is literally like, this book is literally, it's 320 pages, and I'm a little bit upset I didn't come into this a little more prepared because I wasn't sure what questions you were going to ask about
No,
this.
it's fine. It's fine. It's totally fine. I'm incredibly, I spent so much time digging into, are you familiar with like race realism? I don't know how into politics or whatever you are.
Listen, I am not into politics at all, but I 100% understand how you need to critique every single word that comes out of a person's
it's just like, it's one of
correct.
those things where it's like when I dug into race realism, my hope was that like, okay, well, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to figure out what's going on. And fucking Christ, that conversation is so fucking complicated. And like I went into that, I'm not arrogant when I go into these topics. I understand there's a lot to know, but damn, like I went into that expecting to find answers, and I came out like so scared to make any declarative statements on anything related to like environment or genetics influencing some trait. Like all of it is so fucking complicated, the way that it plays into each other. So anytime, and then like diets are insane, and this, right? Diets are insanely fucking complicated, where nothing is absolutely clear. Just because you ingest a certain amount of a vitamin doesn't mean that's going to be available for your body to consume. Even if your body can consume it, your body might not be able to utilize it. Even if it utilizes it, there might be certain things that inhibit, the efficiency of it. Like there's so much shit that goes into this.
There's definitely a lot to it, but
And I don't think anybody's gotten close to like solving any of these things where like we can say like for 100% like, oh, well, if you just do this, like this thing will absolutely happen. And we can prescribe this thing and it will fix definitely like these things. Like all of it just seems, so I get really nervous when somebody kind of like provides like a one-stop like catch-all, like, oh, well, if we just all eat meat, this will fix all of these problems. Those answers always seem a little bit too simple to me. And there's so much groundwork that has to be laid to 100% prove.
I don't want to say saying, oh, if we just start eating meat, that'll solve. No, I mean, each animal food specifically has a certain vitamin content depending on how it was raised. And I mean, I don't want to use an animal example, so let's use a tribal example. Native Americans used to feed specific foods to pregnant women and nursing women to ensure fertility, like fish eggs, fish roe, liver. And when you actually look at the nutrient content of these foods, there's a reason they were feeding it to the pregnant women. They were exponentially higher in nutrients than all of the other animal foods. But if I made a really blanket statement like, right now, diseases, we need glasses, we need braces, right? And these indigenous people, and one main factor is the diet. And you would try to argue that factors that, oh, they needed to see because they were hunting, or, oh, well, they needed to be tall because they needed to cover. Is that your main basis? Is that
I'm not, yeah, and I'm not saying that is the reason. I'm saying those could be explanations. I don't know. I'm agnostic.
Someone just said that there's no diet that is universally good in and if we look at these indigenous group, there's a huge variance in what they would have eaten. You might have an African coastal tribe that literally subsisted off of fish called the Neurs, the Neurs, and they were known for being very tall, well over 6 feet tall. I think over 6.5 feet in many cases. The Maasai.
Real quick, something this is kind of what I was familiar with was that the idea was that our jaws today we don't have enough room for all of our teeth anymore. That was kind of like my impression. I'm just going through an article now, and there could be more here, but like basically the idea was that our heads have gotten so small over time that we just can't fit all of the teeth in our mouth anymore.
You're saying how long a period of time would you consider that to be? Like hundreds or thousands of years?
I think hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay, so I have a picture of my great-grandfather that had a drastically wider jaw and facial development than me. It up. So this is my grandfather. Then let me try to find a picture of me with my shirt on, because that's all I post on Twitter. Hold on. I got a silly picture from Halloween.
Well, here, what I'm curious of is that, like, is there an example of like modern day people?
I mean, look at my grandfather, like, and my great grandfather and myself. We have very similar facial features, but my face is drastically narrower than his.
And you think this is just because of diet?
I think this is specifically because he received more nutrition during developmental stages of his life. Like, he was breastfed, whereas I was formula fed. I think he received more nutrition during the key developmental stages of his life, particularly prenatal health, during the pregnancy, breastfeeding. Indigenous groups used to feed children for a minimum of 2 years, and some indigenous groups breastfed their children for up to 4 to 5 years, and that was not unusual. 2 years was on the lower side. Chat wants to see my Chad grandfather. Someone said that support. I'm trying to hold on. The chat's going fast. There's evidence to support facial development is tied to the hardness of food we eat during childhood. You might say that, but why are there babies born with much wider jaws than other babies? And then why are there children that are 1 or 2 years of age that have drastically wider faces when they're always being breastfed?
Indigenous groups also didn't have people living to an average
the hard
of 70
food argument
plus.
and the chewing argument, it just doesn't make any sense to me when the hardness of the food in what we eat versus what indigenous groups of people used to eat was no significant difference. See if I could find you a skull structure of Inuits.
Um, so an evolutionary biologist, Daniel Lieberman, at Harvard University conducted an elegant study in 2004 on hyraxes fed soft cooked foods and tough raw foods. Higher chewing strains resulted in more growth in the bone that anchors the teeth. He showed that the ultimate length of a jaw depends on the stress put on it during chewing. Selection for jaw length is based on the growth expected given a hard or tough diet. In this way, diet determines how well jaw length matches tooth size.
But what's the argument that is harder than we eat now? I just don't see that.
So the argument presented here is that in this way, it's a fine balancing act, and our species has had 200,000 years to get it right. The problem for us is that for most of the time, our ancestors didn't feed their children the kind of mush we feed ours today. Our teeth don't fit because they evolved instead to match the longer jaw that would develop in a more challenging strain environment. Ours are too short because we don't give them the workout nature expects us to. So the argument in this article is that chewing things more would lead to greater bone growth during adolescence that would cause you to grow a jaw that would be able to accommodate the average amount of teeth that a human has.
We see there are drastic, and you could Google pictures of babies. There are drastic differences in mouth and facial width of just babies when they're born straight out of the mother's womb.
Well, yeah, but that can...
Especially 1 or 2 years of life.
But that can just be genetic differences, right?
But my argument is that genetics are determined. But you could probably even find a woman who's given birth to multiple children, and the width of their jaw decreases as she loses nutrients and gives birth to more children.
I mean, that's possible, but that should be demonstrated in a study if that's true, right? That like as women get older.
I really don't like this hard versus soft food argument because children are typically breastfed for early stages of their life, and how does that have and if there are drastic differences in facial structure of young children, then why are we correlated, especially the width of the mouth and the jaw, then why are we trying to argue soft versus hard food? I just don't understand that part.
Well, I don't know. Did children exclusively drink breast milk growing up, or?
Yeah, I mean, in indigenous groups, they were breastfed for a minimum of 2 years.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is, were they exclusively breastfed, or were they breastfed and then they also ate other things as well?
Oh, they were exclusively breastfed, and then foods would be incorporated, 2-3 years into their life.
I'm trying to think.
I don't understand what foods are you going to feed a child that are harder than the foods we have now? I think most children that are 2 to 3 years of age now are chewing much harder foods than our ancestors were.
Wait, no way. Today we feed them like formula and things out of like Gerber jars and shit. Like they're getting very soft foods.
But what food would you have fed a child that is harder than what we have now 100 years ago?
I mean, any type of meat or vegetable?
If you take meat, and usually the indigenous groups fed their children raw meat, and I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have had steak tartare, carpaccio, or certain cuts of raw meat, and not even raw meat. If we look at egg yolks, if we look at brain tissue, bone marrow, butter, fat, cream, these animal foods are very, very soft. They're not actually that hard. Gnawing on, not gnawing on ossobuco here. That's not what they're chewing. If anything, I would argue that the foods we give to children now are much harder. From cereal, what would a child have for lunch typically? If you had cereal for breakfast, I mean, cereal I would consider a hard food.
I don't think cereals are a hard food. No, not at all. When I think of a hard food, I think of something that requires chewing. You typically don't chew cereal the same way that you would like chew on something more, I don't know, like fibrous. I'm trying to think of an example of like some type of vegetable that like even something like a broccoli or whatever would require more chewing than like a piece of cereal that's like 90% air. No, like.
But I think this is just. I mean,
like carrots and stuff like that. Sure.
But you have to the thing you have to understand is now didn't exist 100 years ago, let alone hundreds of years ago. Like creation of pretty. If you look at diets in places even like 100 to 200 years ago, they didn't have access to fruits and vegetables because there was no such thing as refrigeration, and it was very seasonally based. Come from grains and animal foods, and that was it. Your choice of nutrition over the course of most of the year was either locally, and then just whatever animal foods you had access to.
Sorry, so I'm gonna chat. Wait, how do you not chew cereal? So cereal. So there are things that you can chew. I don't know how to explain this, but like if you eat foods like even like an apple or like a carrot, there are things that you chew that you like really have to chew that will leave your jaw feeling like you've like had to work it out. Cereal is not like this at all. When you eat cereal, it's like cereal's like you barely crunch it and then it's done.
Yeah,
It's
like
not
if you take like a bite out of a steak and it's like it
Yeah.
tenderizes it slightly, but then you got to keep
Mhm.
taking bites out of it.
Yeah, like something like meaty stuff. Yeah, it's gonna be way different than like cereal is not something you chew. I mean, like you chew it, you don't just swallow it whole. But like,
If you bite a piece of cereal, it like breaks down.
yeah,
and
but you're
that's
never
it.
gonna eat cereal and feel like your jaw is tired from eating cereal. Like it just doesn't work that way.
The only main gripe I have with the hardness of the food argument is
Mm-hmm.
just looking at the very very young children.
Yeah, no,
That's
I'm
the main.
curious. And again, it's just stuff I need empirical data. I'm trying to find like, because like this random link says that the prehistoric diet was mainly breastfeeding. So I'm curious if like up to what age do you have to? Well, actually, I guess we can just look at the original Harvard thing that was.
I used to have studies that and I don't know if it was from the Australian Breastfeeding Society. There was one group of indigenous that breastfed till they were like 7 years old. It was something crazy.
Because I don't know how long you have to eat and chew stuff until your jaw grows. Like maybe this is a process that you can do up until you're 14, 15, 16, or maybe up until you're into your mid 20s when puberty completely stops or whatever.
I mean, I don't know how relevant this is. There was I don't know if it was a documentary. There was a guy, I think his name was Gail Sayed, who was on the Joe Rogan podcast. He talked about how a tribe of monkeys started eating garbage out of a resort that was built, and they were eating a lot of cake. And these monkeys developed tuberculosis within a generation or two and just died. And tuberculosis is, and if you read Weston Price's book, just seems to be a disease that kills people when they go on modern diets in the absence of vaccinations. Let me see if I could find that. I don't think I'm gonna be able to find that, but I'm gonna look at
Hello, me old
caloric
chum.
availability
Thanks
in
for all the
nature
dank
and just try to kind of
maymays.
relate that to how you would have even been able to obtain your calories, or is that?
Wait, I'm sorry. Say that again.
Do we want to look at availability of calories in a natural environment, like outside of the context of modern refrigeration and transportation that's
Well, I don't
only
know.
been
Right. I'm
present
just
for.
curious right now what causes our teeth to fit in our mouth. That's the only question I'm curious about right now. Is if a lot of adolescent chewing can actually impact whether or not our teeth fit in our face, or if this is just
I
like
mean,
a nutrient thing.
I mean, if you scroll through the Weston Price book, they have just
Keiko Butterfly
one generation
America.
of parents following a modernized diet of refined grains and flours and jams and canned foods. The facial structure of children was much more narrow, and they lacked the jaw width to accommodate the teeth. Let me see if I could find a specific quote from the book.
Because it seems like the amount of chewing, this seems to be something that, because I'm seeing this in another area as well. In a report published online this week in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, she concludes that the transition of farming, which involved the domestication of plants and animals, a major increase in food processing, and thus consumption of easier to chew food, altered the shape of the human jaw, making it shorter and less robust. And the shortening of the jaw, she suggests, led to greater crowding of the teeth and the orthodontist bills that plague many modern families. As for whether these changes in jaw shape are due to natural selection over many generations or simply changes that arise anew in each growing infant, von Kreman Tobadel cites experimental studies showing that animals raised on softer, more processed foods grow smaller jaws than those fed fresh, unprocessed foods. But even if the jaw alterations were due to natural selection, she concludes, they would have taken place over a relatively short period of evolutionary time.
Would that explain why we have a lot of modern people that still have it's genetic, that a lot of modern people that have this jaw width and proper facial development while having, without the need for braces, they have plenty of room in their mouth for these teeth. There are modern people that have that, and then there are people that are polar opposites that needed braces multiple times, corrective jaw surgeries and things like that.
Wait, what's the question? Or
I mean, you're saying that past generations were chewing harder foods, and that's why differently than ours now. But what about modern people that seem to have proper facial development and don't need braces?
I don't know. Were they chewing harder foods in adolescence? Were they just genetically born with larger jaws? Like, I'm not sure.
And that's what I'm saying. I mean, my theory is that, and the information that I've presented here is to try to correlate of, the mother's diet, the child's diet during developmental periods is what gauges whether or not the body has enough vitamins and minerals to even form the skeletal structure of the face. And all right, skulls of primitive Indians. And I mean, you want to look at like pictures of skulls in the primitive Indians? I mean,
well, no, again, this isn't like I know that you have your explanation, and I don't deny that these correlations exist. I'm just rejecting that we can say it's causal because the correlation exists. Like, that's it. I'm just saying that your claim is very strong, and that to get to that very strong claim, like experimental data and biological mechanisms are really important here.
So you're saying we've kind of established that, these people had perfect facial development and they were consuming, certain amounts of animal foods, but to now prove is that it's not due to things like chewing harder food, environmental changes, exercise, things like that.
Yeah, that maybe you could take two people, you could grow one on a meat diet, and you could take another person and put them on a meat diet, but all their meat goes into a milkshake blender first, and maybe the first person grows up with a healthy jaw or whatever, and the second person doesn't, and it's not actually the nutrients, it's the environmental impact, it's the actual working of the jaw that lengthens the jaw that causes the teeth to fit in the mouth. That could be possible. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying that could be a possible explanation.
I mean, I've said this a couple times already, but then how would you explain a drastic width of facial difference between two young children? Would you say that's genetic?
I mean, it could just be genetic variation. What do you mean? I mean, that's part of having kids, right? Genes vary from child to child.
I mean, if the environment, if the diet of people and where they're living isn't what determines their genetics over the course of years and years and years, I mean, then what would really do that, though?
Can you say that again?
If we, what I was going to say was, if you plant Italian person in the Netherlands for 10 generations, I'm sure they would taller and they would start develop, because if we can argue that saying that kind of humans migrated from various parts of Africa to different parts of the world.
Yeah.
That's generally accepted by people. So if the original human was from African descent and it migrated, then what determined features such as our skin color, type of hair, height, wouldn't all of these things be determined by the environment that we're living in? And wouldn't part of that be diet?
It can be, sure.
And if that doesn't explain it, then what does?
Well, but what I'm saying is that, like, part of it could be diet, but part of it could be other environmental factors as well. So, for instance, when we talk about, like, perfect jaws, that might be chewing growing up rather than types of food eaten or the nutrients of the food available. That might be more of an exercise thing than a nutrition thing.
I mean, if you had a picture of a baby that came right out of a mother's womb and it had a very wide jaw and wide lips, and then you took a picture of a baby that had a very narrow jaw and narrow lips, you would just say that's purely genetic?
Well, it could be. It could be genetic. It could be based on the mother's diet. But also, the child with the wide jaw, maybe they grow up, if they eat only soft foods and their jaw doesn't accommodate like all the teeth that they would have growing up. And maybe the one with the smaller jaw grows up to accommodate all of the teeth anyway. Like,
Yeah, but then why do all indigenous groups that were still close to their diet, such as various African tribes, Australian Aborigines, Native Americans, why do they all have very specifically wide faces and lip development? Like these indigenous groups in various parts of the world, although they look different, their facial features are incredibly similar in regards to the lip development. And I'll bring up I'll bring up 3 pictures of 3 different indigenous groups.
well, yeah,
Native
but the
Americans,
pictures,
Australian
I don't. But
Aborigines.
the individual pictures don't say much, right? Where like we need to talk about wide groups of people, right?
I mean, how many pictures of Native Americans do you want me to give you? Like 10?
Well, not pictures. We'd be talking about like averages between groups of people. So like some sort of study across all the collected skulls or whatever of certain things, and then comparing these facial features and then creating a data set. Not right.
Chewing gives lip
mean,
gains. Duh.
Could I find that information? I mean,
I don't know. This is really fucking hard shit.
I mean, I could find that information, but
here would be interesting information, okay? Are there studies on historic people that had mainly plant-based diets, and then studies on historic people that had mainly meat-based diets, and the historic people that ate more plants than meat ended up having shitty jaws compared to the people that ate more meats? Because I was under the understanding that most ancient people were doing really good as far as teeth goes, regardless of whether or not they ate more meat or more plants, which would lend a little bit more credence to the idea that chewing things and having less processed foods caused an environmental interaction with our jaws that made them accommodate our teeth more so than just eating more meat. That would be
the constant factor in all of those indigenous diets is that 65% of their calories as a minimum came from animal foods.
But is that really true though? I don't think that's true. That every single group of people, all indigenous peoples, had 65% of their calories coming from animals.
It varied from 55% to like 80%, and even some indigenous groups would consume only meat, like the Inuits and the Eskimos. The reason I wanted to bring up the nature argument is because cold climate, the only possible way you could procure, just in general, in any climate, in any part of the world, before modern agriculture, and humans have existed for long periods of time before modern agriculture, procured enough calories from nature was from animal foods. 100%. There's no source of nutrition from plant foods pre-agriculture. It was animal-based diet. And then grains started to take place, a lot of animal foods depending on accessibility. In this book, the Nutrition and Physical Generation has, they look at skulls of different types of Indians. They looked at children showing changes in facial and dental arch formation from modern foods. In the indigenous Seminole Indians, were normal with freedom from facial distortion. In contrast with this, the Indians of Florida, who are living today in contact with modern civilized foods, 100 teeth, they had much more tooth decay and showed a typical deformation with crowding of the teeth and narrowing of the face, conditions that have been found in all human stocks when on an inadequate nutrition during the formative and early growth period. This is on page...
Just eat healthy, lol.
Some young college student trying to prove a point from a single book you read. The 2 primary books, I mean, Weston Price, Nutritional Nutrition, Physical Generation. You have Vilhjalmur Steffens's The Fat of the Land. There are a lot of and pretty much any sort of write-up on tribes. I've read a lot about, I can't remember the name of the book. I think it's called something with the word white man in it. It's a book on Native American Indians and what they used to eat. I've read a lot of books on like tribes, on the Dinka, on the Maasai, a lot of studies on them as well.
Okay, I'll do more. I'll try to do more research into the into I guess like these prehistoric diets and see how much variance there was from one group to another, and then maybe we can revisit the conversation when I get a little bit more information about it. Or
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, even me, it's just I'm all over the place with the various topics that I talk to related to this. Get it to like a marketable kind of way, so close to diets people are following now, but it's difficult because the main thing holding back this information is the lack of data on these people.
Sure.
I mean, you could look at what the indigenous aborigines ate all you want. You could look at what they looked like, and you could put two and two together, but like correlative or causative studies on this, then to argue this point is it's difficult.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation, buddy. Do you have any final parting words?
If you guys are interested in this, I mean, you can read that book. That's a pretty good explanation. Also a pretty good one. I mean, that's really it. Like, you have to be pretty open-minded and read these books. And then there's still a lot of, even when I initially read these, I still had a lot of reservations about this. We aren't interested. I can't blame Twitch. I didn't honestly, for the first half of this conversation, I didn't even know you were live on stream. So
Oh shit! Sorry, I thought you.
no, it's okay. No, I mean, honestly, if I thought it was, if I knew this was going to be live, I would have prepared a lot more information. I'm kind of just I had some stuff together, and I had kind of the points I was going to argue. So presented a decent amount of information that if people want to look at it, but I mean, I can understand that if people don't have like a black and white concrete thing that you can put in front of them, it's very difficult to and there's so much conflicting stuff too, a lot of conflicting theories on every single one of these topics. But I don't want to take up any more time. I know chat isn't really too enthusiastic about this topic. No, thanks for having me on. I think if you are interested in revisiting this, I'll try to, I mean, just let me know like what specifically you want to talk on, and I'll try to have as many resources as possible.
Okay, cool. All right, well, hey, I appreciate the conversation, man.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of the weekend, guys.
Yep, bye.